Imagine walking past someone who smiles at strangers, help old people across the streets, has a normal job, normal friends, maybe even a family. Nothing about them feels dangerous. You'd probably trust them within minutes. But here's the terrifying part. Behind that ordinary smile, they have already taken lives. Not once, not twice, but over and over again. What's even more disturbing is most serial killers don't look like monsters. They look like everyone else. The real question is what happens inside the human brain that allows someone to kill without feeling guilt? And more importantly, can an ordinary person ever become one? Let's step inside the mind of a serial killer. Let's talk about Ethan. Ethan was 33 years old. He lived alone in a quiet neighborhood on the edge of the city. Every morning, he woke up at exactly 7 o'clock, made himself a cup of coffee, ironed his shirt, and left for work. He wasn't rich, he wasn't famous, he wasn't someone people talked about. To everyone around him, he was simply another ordinary man trying to live an ordinary life. His neighbors liked him. The elderly woman living next door often asked him to carry her groceries upstairs. Children waved at him whenever he returned from work, and Ethan always smiled and waved back. At the office, he was known as someone who never raised his voice. He remembered birthdays. He listened more than he spoke. He even stayed late to help co-workers finish their projects. If someone had asked, "Who is the last person you'd ever suspect of doing something terrible?" most people would have pointed to Ethan, because nothing about him looked dangerous, but appearances can be incredibly deceptive. One Friday evening, as Ethan walked home from work, he noticed a young woman standing outside a bus stop. She looked frustrated. Her phone battery had died, and she was trying to figure out how to get home. Ethan walked over with a calm smile and politely asked if she needed help. At first she hesitated, but Ethan looked trustworthy. His voice was gentle, his smile felt genuine. Within a few minutes they were talking like old friends. He offered to call her a taxi from his phone. She thanked him, she smiled, and she got into the car. The next morning, her family reported her missing. Police searched the city for weeks. Security cameras captured her talking to a man near the bus stop, but the footage was blurry. His face couldn't be identified. The investigation slowly went cold. Meanwhile, on Monday morning, Ethan arrived at work exactly on time. He smiled at the receptionist, grabbed a cup of coffee, asked his coworker how her weekend had been, and spent the rest of the day answering emails. Nobody noticed anything unusual because nobody believed that someone capable of something so horrifying could look so completely normal. And that's exactly where psychology becomes fascinating. Police searched the city for weeks. News channels covered the story every single day. People were terrified. Parents stopped letting their children walk home alone. Everyone had the same question: who did this? But Ethan never looked worried. In fact, he watched every news report with complete calm. Every evening, he sat alone on his couch, turned on the television, and quietly listened as reporters discussed the missing woman. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't afraid of getting caught. He was interested in something else. He wanted to know how close the police really were. Days turned into weeks. The investigation slowed down. There were no witnesses, no fingerprints, and no useful evidence. Eventually, the headlines disappeared. Life returned to normal. Everyone moved on except Ethan. One night, as he sat alone in his apartment, he expected to feel satisfied. He had gotten away with it. Nobody suspected him. He should have felt victorious, but instead, he felt empty. The excitement that had filled his mind was already fading. For a moment, he actually asked himself, "Is that it?" The answer came almost immediately: no. His brain wasn't looking for a victim, it was looking for the feeling. And that's exactly where psychology gives us one of its most disturbing answers. Most people think serial killers kill because they are angry or because they enjoy violence. But in many cases, the real addiction isn't the act itself. It's the psychological reward that comes before it: the planning, the manipulation, the feeling of complete control, the belief that they are smarter than anyone else. Just like dopamine keeps a gambler chasing the next win. For some serial killers, that same reward system keeps pushing them to repeat the cycle. And once the feeling disappears, their mind starts to research for it all over again. A few months passed. The city slowly forgot about the missing woman. The people stopped talking about her, the news moved on, life returned to normal. But Ethan could not stop thinking, not about her, about the feeling, the control, the excitement, the certainty that he had fooled everyone. It stayed in his mind for weeks until one evening, even that feeling disappeared. For the first time, he felt restless. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't focus at work. Nothing felt interesting anymore. Then, one afternoon, he noticed a college student sitting alone inside a bookstore. She looked confused, trying to find out a book on her psychology class. Ethan smiled, walked over, and said, I think I read that a few months ago. It's actually really good. She smiled back. Within minutes, they were talking. Not because Ethan was charming by accident, but because he had spent years learning exactly how to earn someone's trust. He never spoke too much. He listened. He asked questions. He remembered small details. He made people feel important. And that's exactly where psychology becomes fascinating. Manipulation rarely begins with lies, it begins with trust. The most dangerous manipulators don't force people to believe them, they make people feel understood. When someone feels understood, their brain naturally lowers its guard. That's why many serial killers appear surprisingly friendly during first meeting. They aren't trying to make people happy, they are trying to make people comfortable. Because a comfortable mind questions less, trusts more, and notices danger far too late. Ethan understood that better than anyone. To everyone he met, he looked like the safest person in the room, and every conversation, every smile, every act of kindness had only one purpose: to see how easily another human being could be convinced to trust him. Weeks turned into months. By now, three people had disappeared. They had never met each other. They came from different parts of the city, different ages, different professions. At first, the police believed the cases were unrelated, but one detective didn't agree. Her name was Sarah. She spent nights studying every file, every photograph, every witness statement. There was no DNA, no fingerprints, no murder weapon, almost nothing. But there was one detail that kept bothering her. Every victim had last been seen talking to a stranger, someone described as calm, friendly, polite. The descriptions weren't identical, but they all created the same image: someone who immediately made people feel safe. Sarah couldn't explain it, but she had a feeling. She wasn't looking for a violent man. She was looking for someone who looked completely ordinary. Meanwhile, Ethan had no idea that anyone was getting closer. He still walked into work every morning, still smiled at his neighbor, still helped the old woman next door to carry her groceries upstairs. The strange part was that none of it felt like anymore. Pretending to be kind had become so natural that even Ethan sometimes forgot he was pretending. Psychologists have found that some psychopaths don't struggle to lie because after repeating the same behavior for years, the lie becomes part of their identity. They don't feel guilty because they no longer separate the mask from the person underneath it. To everyone else, Ethan looked genuine, but inside, every smile, every conversation, every act of kindness was simply another tool to remain invisible. He believed he built the perfect life, a life where nobody would ever suspect him. But every serial killer, no matter how careful, eventually makes one mistake, and Ethan was only days away from making his. The next morning, detective visited the bookstore where one of the missing victims had last been seen. She wasn't expecting much. Months had already passed. Most of the witnesses barely remembered anything. Then, an elderly cashier quietly said something that changed the entire investigation. There was a man with her. He wasn't acting strange. Actually, he seemed incredibly polite. Sarah asked for a description. The cashier closed her eyes for a moment. Around 30, dark hair, very calm. The kind of person you'd trust immediately. Sarah's heart sank. It was the same description again. Not angry, not aggressive, not suspicious, just normal. That evening, Sarah covered an entire wall in her office with photographs. Three victims, three different locations, three different lives. But one thing connected them all. Every single one had willingly spoken to the same kind of man. That's when Sarah stopped looking for a murderer. She started looking for a manipulator. Meanwhile, Ethan was completely unaware. He sat alone in his apartment, listening to soft jazz music while reading tomorrow's newspaper. There was no fear on his face, no panic, only confidence. He believed he had planned everything perfectly. After all, there was no evidence, no witnesses who could identify him, no reasons for the police to ever suspect an ordinary office worker. The longer someone successfully gets away with the manipulation, the stronger their confidence becomes. Psychologists calls this overconfidence bias. When our brain experiences repeated success, it starts believing I'm smarter than anyone else. That false confidence slowly makes people careless, not immediately, but eventually. Because once someone's believe they're untouchable, they stop noticing their own mistakes, and without realizing it, Ethan had already made one. A mistake so small he never even noticed it. But Detective Sarah was about to find it. Sarah knew Ethan was the killer. She could feel it, but the feelings don't solve cases. Evidences does. For weeks she watched him. Every morning he went to work. Every evening he came home. No mistakes, no panic, nothing. Then Sarah made a decision that shocked everyone in the department. She stopped following him. At least that's what Ethan believed. News channel soon reported police are now investigating a completely different suspect. Ethan watched the report and smiled. For the first time in months, he finally relaxed. He believed he had won. But confidence has a strange effect on a human mind. The moment we believe we are untouchable, we stop being careful. 3 nights later, Ethan drove to an abandoned storage unit on the outskirts of the city. It was a place he hadn't visited in years, not because he needed to, but because he wanted to make sure everything was still there. Hidden beneath the loose wooden floor was a small metal box. Inside were dozens of ordinary objects: a bus ticket, a silver bracelet, a hotel keycard, a bookstore receipt, worthless to anyone else. But to Ethan, each one represented a memory. He never noticed the tiny GPS tracker attached beneath his car. 2 weeks earlier, he never noticed the unmarked police vehicles parked half a mile away, and he never realized that Sarah had never stopped watching him. The moment Ethan lifted the metal box, police light flooded the entire building. There was nowhere left to run. For the first time, Ethan wasn't in control anymore. People rarely fail because they aren't intelligent enough. They fail because success convinces them they are incapable of failing. The more often we escape consequences, the more our brain believes we'll escape forever. Ethan wasn't caught because he left fingerprints. He wasn't caught because he confessed. He was caught because his own mind became predictable. And in the end, the detective doesn't solve the case by thinking like a police officer. She solved it by thinking like a psychopath.